In this video we're going to be going back to working with bitmaps and importing images into our Flash movie that we're going to be able to use and manipulate as we need to. Sometimes the vector image isn't going to give us enough detail that we need to bring in a bitmap image. When we're working with photos or pictures, we need to bring in the bitmap image in order to use it. So we're just going to open up the library here so we can see as we bring in the image it's going to appear here. Work under the same concept as the symbols in the library, where in our library we're going to have our master of, or the parent of the image, and it's going to sit in under the name here. We're going to be able to see it in a second. And what we're going to be doing, we're going to be creating instances of it on top of the stage, and from the instances that's what we're going to work with on the stage. There's a few things to consider before importing a bitmap image. We should consider the height and width of the image that we're going to be using. If our Flash movie is going to play at the size of our stage here, we got to take into consideration that we don't need to bring in a bitmap that's going to be large or far too large for our stage. Let's say if we're bringing in a bitmap, we want it to be this size here, which we can see under properties that the width is 186.4 and the height is 136, and this is the exact size of the bitmap that we want to bring in. The bitmap should have been adjusted beforehand before we're bringing it in to the appropriate size in order to save file size, because bitmaps do take up a lot of space in your Flash movie. If you bring in too large of a bitmap into your Flash movie, it can drastically increase the size of your Flash movie, which affects the playing speed of it, especially on the internet. We've got another thing that we've got to take into consideration before we bring in our bitmap. We've got to take into consideration the color depth that we're using, 16, 8, 24-bit. So before we bring the image in, we should prepare it beforehand to maximize the file size of it. There's also the compression of the image that we're importing. We've got to make sure that it's compressed properly in order to save file size on our Flash movie. So now that we're ready to bring in the bitmap into our movie here, we would go to File and we would scroll down to Import to Library. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be bringing the image into our library. So selecting that opens up our default folder here, which is sitting on our hard drive, and we're able to select from the images that are available to us. We can see that these are bitmap images, the logo and the blue dot. So I'm going to go ahead and import the logo into our library. Selecting it, selecting open, and boom, there we can see that the logo now is sitting in the library. And we can see what it is by selecting it in the library. If we wanted to bring it out onto our stage, we're able to do that by the simple drag and drop. It comes the exact pixel size as the bitmap is set to. So right now it's been set to 320 by 240 originally, and this is what it's come out to on our stage. And of course if we wanted to, we're able to adjust it, but it doesn't make sense if we're only using an image this big that we're taking up this much file size. So once again, the image should have best been prepared beforehand. Just going to bring it back to the size that it was, and it's best to have been prepared beforehand before bringing it into the Flash movie. Now that we've imported a bitmap, we're going to import another kind of image into our Flash movie here. This time we're going to import it directly. We're not going to select import to library, we're just going to select import. We can access this also by pressing Ctrl R on the keyboard. And what this is going to do, this is going to import the image directly onto our main stage area. We're going to be importing a GIF file. We've got one here, GIF image. We can see the size of it is 6.36 kilobytes. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to import that in by selecting open. And we can see that in the library the main image has been created, and we can also see that an instance of it has been created on our main stage area. Now this, once again, works the same as the symbols, where we're able to adjust it, and however we need to adjust it, we're able to do our adjusting, and we can see that our main image in our library still stays the same. If we want to make a second instance of it, we could simply drag and drop it, and we have back the same one that we originally had. If we want to do some compression of this particular image, we're able to select on top of it, right click, go down to properties, and we're able to see the properties of this particular bitmap, which is called branch. We can see that it's originally a GIF file, where you can see when it's created, the size of it, the bits per pixel, where you can check off allow smoothing or not to allow smoothing. And we've got a few different options for compression. If we're compressing here with the PNG GIF or the JPEG is usually a little bit more efficient. We can have the document at the default quality, or we can adjust the quality of it. And we're able to test the compression by pressing test here. And this is the JPEG setting from the export movie, but this is a GIF file, so what we're going to do, we're going to select the GIF and we're going to test it as a PNG GIF, and we can see that originally this file started off at 98.5 kilobytes and it's compressed to 6.8 kilobytes, which is 6% of the original. And here we're able to select update to update our image, and we've updated, and OK. So that's just a way to compress a file. Actually, once you've imported it into Flash, you are able to do the compression in here, and then we just select update and we would have updated the file. But this image was already compressed before I brought it in, as we saw when we were trying to bring it in, that it was at already its compressed state. I'm going to clear these off of the stage here, and we're going to work with our original bitmap image. When we bring our bitmap into our Flash movie, the bitmap is automatically brought in as in a grouped state. So in order to use the bitmap as we need to in our Flash movie, we want to select modify and we want to break it apart. And as we can see, if you watch the bitmap just below this the screen here, we're going to be able to open it up and we can see that the image has broken apart. If we want to use the Lasso Tool, we can cut out part of this image now, which we weren't able to do so before. Double clicking on it, and we can move it over with our selection tool. You can see that the image now, it's broken apart and we're able to manipulate it as we need to. If you want to use it as a fill color, I'm just going to put this back into where it was. If you want to use this bitmap as a fill color, it also needs to be broken apart first. And what you would do after it's broken apart, just make sure you check and see that it is actually broken apart. You can see this by when you select it, that you get a whole bunch of tiny dots on it, whereas before we were getting the box around it. So now I'm going to use the Eyedropper tool. I'm going to select that as our fill image, and you can see here in the fill color that the tiny bitmap image is actually showing up in here, and I can simply use it like this and fill the box that I had here. It also works the same for when I'm using a brush stroke. You can see that as my stroke is going across the screen here, I'm actually filling in more parts of the bitmap, and it's kind of a useful tool depending on where you're using it, if you want to have parts of the bitmap used and other parts that you don't need to have used. In order to convert the bitmap into a vector, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear our screen here, and I'm going to bring over the same bitmap that we were just using. Remember all the work that I've just done, breaking it apart and everything that's been on the instance, it hasn't been on the master copy of the image. So what I've done is I've just dragged another copy onto our stage here that I'm going to be able to work with. If I want to convert this into a vector image, I've got an option here to do that in Flash. You have to make sure that your image is not broken apart to do this. If you've broken it apart, it's too late to convert it into a vector. So we want to go back up to Modify, and what we're going to do, we're going to select Trace Bitmap. And we're given a few options here of the color threshold that we want to trace with, the minimum area. We've got a curve fit that we're able to curve pixels, very tight, tight, normal, smooth, very smooth. It's going to select normal, and the corner threshold. In the color threshold, we're able to enter a number from 1 to 500, and this represents the number of colors that we're able to use in our image. In the minimum area, this is the minimum number of pixels that are going to be surrounding it. The lower the number, the more colors we're able to have. So if we're able to choose a number from 1 to 1,000, if we select maybe 5, the lower the number, usually the better. And we've got the curve fit, which basically deals with the smoothness of the image, and we've got the corner threshold, which would be dealing with the sharp edges of the image. So we've got a basic default setting here, which I'm just going to select OK, and as you can see, it's going to trace the bitmap and it brings in our bitmap image. Now this is no longer a bitmap image, it's now a vector image. We lost quite a bit of quality from the original. You can see if we bring it side by side, the comparison of the difference. I can trace this with a smaller amount here in the minimum area of pixels, and we can see that the image is actually, it's going to come out a little bit better, but it's still going to be in vector, so it's not going to be as crisp and clear as the bitmap image was. Just going to click off of it so we can see the way it's supposed to look. It's just taking a second here. You can see that the same thing pretty much, it's not much clearer, and this is pretty much as clear as the image is going to get when we're using our trace bitmap. But we are able to now select and move the different parts of the vector as we need to, and we can manipulate it as we were with any normal vector that we were using. If we're drawing a circle on top, we're just going to see the way that it's going to come out and work here. And oh, sorry, we've got the fill color still as this, so it's a little hard to distinguish here. Do the fill color as blue, and now we can see that when we move this image away, we've actually cutting it out like what we were doing before with the different fills when in the earlier video, where when we have a vector we move it on top. If we deselect it and if we move it over, we can see that we're actually cutting out and that there's nothing below it. So whereas when we were using when we had the actual image here, and we can move the vector, this vector is actually not on top, I can draw it on top, or it's not letting me draw it on top, but I can move it on below it and it's not affecting the bitmap image at all. One other type of image that we're able to import into our Flash is a vector image. So I'm just going to select our vector image. I'm going to import it to the library, and here's our vector image. It's just called a face. It's going to be a simple happy face. We can see that this is the image. I'm going to bring it over onto our main stage area, and our image originally, our vector image, is brought in, it's grouped. As you can see, we can ungroup it by selecting the ungroup, and now we can see all the different components that were involved. There's still some that are grouped. The two eyes are still grouped, so we'd have to select it again, double click it, and we can see that this is what the grouping is. Because they were probably made on separate levels, we're able to maneuver it around a little bit now. Remember, we're working right now with the master document. That's why we see that the master is also changing in the library. You can go back to the face, and we can go back to the scene, and we see that we've successfully manipulated our imported vector image. So those are the different kinds of images that you're able to import into your Flash movie.